Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. I am Dr. Mahipal Singh Rathore, and in this video I will be discussing the Vietnam War with you. Before beginning, let me remind you that the pendrive and tablet courses of StudyIQ are available on this phone number, or you can directly visit our website and look all the details about the courses as well as order directly from there. So let us begin with the geography of the region. The map on the right side is a map of Southeast Asia, and as you can see, this is the country called Vietnam, about which we are going to talk. It is surrounded by Laos and Cambodia on the west, and on the north by China. This region has been historically called as Indochina, this entire region. Okay, why? Because it has been influenced by two cultures, India and China. And since 19th century, this was a colony of France, and hence it was called French Indochina. Look at the map on the left side. So the countries of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, these all three together formed French Indochina. They were a colony of France. So this colonial period started in 1860 when France first landed in this region, and by 1888 they had the entire area under them. Till 1941 they were the rulers here, but then came the Japanese during World War II, and the Japanese ruled over this area for the next 4 years, from 1941 to 1945, when Japan was defeated after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered. So the Japanese troops in Vietnam, they surrendered to China. So the northern troops surrendered to China and the southern troops surrendered to UK. As you can see, Vietnam is a very long country geographically. So from this area, all the troops surrendered to China, because China was also a member of allied nations. Remember that. UK, USA, China, they were all allies, and the southern troops, they surrendered to UK. So as soon as the World War II was over, the French said that let us rule over this portion of Indochina again. They said to the British that give us back Indochina. So the British said, okay, take it back. But the people of Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, this is Ho Chi Minh, he had formed a party called Viet Minh. They were against the France and Japanese rule. They were against all kind of foreign rule. They wanted independence. So as soon as the French people came back, they started a war with these French. So there were two people here. One was the army of France and the other was French loyalist. These are the people in Vietnam who are in favor of France. So the war was fought for almost 8 years. This is called the First Indochina War. And in this, France was defeated. Ho Chi Minh was victorious. He led the Viet Minh to victory. And finally, in 1954, the Geneva Accords were signed. What was there in Geneva Accords? So firstly, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam, all three became independent. And France finished its colonial rule. So it was the end of colonialism. But the country of Vietnam was partitioned into north and south temporarily. Okay, that is very important. The partition line was 17th parallel. Why was this done? Because see, the north area had a huge communist influence under Viet Minh, and the leader was Ho Chi Minh, while the southern area was under the influence of Ngo Dinh Diem. And this Ngo Dinh Diem, he started as a prime minister in South Vietnam, but then he slowly became president, and he became an autocratic ruler. He did not have elections, he did not held elections, and he was pro-West. Okay, so the North Vietnam, which was formed, was communist country under Ho Chi Minh, and the South Vietnam was a pro-Western nation under Ngo Dinh Diem. This is Ngo Dinh Diem. You don't need to remember that name. So look at this map. This is North Vietnam. The capital is Hanoi, and even today the map of unified Vietnam is Hanoi. Okay, and on the other hand, you have South Vietnam, and the capital is Saigon. Okay. You see, this river is the Mekong River, and it forms a delta here in southern Vietnam. Remember this name, Mekong River. It is a very important river, starting from China, passing through Laos, Thailand, Cambodia and Vietnam. Then remember this as well, Gulf of Tonkin, this small gulf. This is called Gulf of Tonkin. And this was the 17th parallel. This was the boundary between North and South Vietnam. Now this was the time of Cold War. It was a period of Cold War. The Cold War had just started between USSR on one side. Then there was also China, People's Republic of China, both communist countries, and on the other hand you had USA, UK, NATO, basically NATO allies. So all these countries supported South Vietnam and these countries supported North Vietnam. So obviously, since they are communist and Ho Chi Minh had stayed in Soviet Union, he had stayed in Moscow and China for a long time. He had good support from Mao Zedong of China and USSR Stalin. So these countries this Vietnam became a battleground of Cold War. Okay, just like Korea was divided into North and South Korea and the war was fought, at the same time this North and South Vietnam were also divided. So this was in 1954. But this Geneva Accord did not bring lasting peace. Why? Because the conflict was still ongoing. Small amount of fighting was going on between North and South, but majorly these Viet Cong people in South Vietnam, they were fighting a guerrilla war against the government of South Vietnam. And also this No Dinh Diem was a very corrupt leader, and he became an autocrat. As I told you, he did not hold elections. He became president. He deposed the king, and he was a Catholic and he persecuted Buddhists. He persecuted a lot of Buddhists, and this is the reason that he was assassinated in 1963. So North and South still continued fighting even after 1955, and slowly this conflict turned into the Second Indo-China War. Okay, Second Indo-China War, which is also commonly called as Vietnam War. So you can see there is also already one war is over, and now the second war, that is the Vietnam War, will start. Now the people in Vietnam do not call this war as Vietnam War. They call it the American War, because according to them, they were fighting the foreign people. Earlier they had fought French, and according to them in this second war they fought the Americans. So they call it the American War. Now why did America intervene? The reason was communism. America was frightened by communists, by USSR, and they said that if South Vietnam is allowed to fall into communist hands, according to domino theory, all the neighboring countries will slowly, if this one piece falls, then all these will fall. And so if South Vietnam turns communist, then Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, all these Southeast Asian countries can become communist. So this was a risk. So this domino theory was very popular in 1950s. Okay, all the policymakers in USA were big fans of this domino theory. So according to them, communism has to be contained. It cannot be rooted out, but it can be contained. So because of this, America intervened in Vietnam. Initially they sent advisors, military advisors. Okay, they did not fight, but they advised the military of South Vietnam. They helped them attack, they helped them plan, they trained the soldiers of South Vietnam. And these advisors were sent since the early 1950s. But under John F. Kennedy, who became the president in 1961, under John F. Kennedy, these advisors greatly increased. Okay, so the large number of advisors were sent under John F. Kennedy, and slowly these numbers increased in 1962, 63, 64. But America was officially still not at war. The official start of war is considered after this Gulf of Tonkin incident. By this time, John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and the new president was this guy. His name is Lyndon Johnson. So Lyndon Johnson was the president, and this Gulf of Tonkin incident was in August 64. What happened was that a US naval ship, USS Maddox, so it was part of those advisors. Okay, it was here in Gulf of Tonkin, which I showed you in the map earlier also. It was attacked by North Vietnamese boats, and after this attack, the US Congress, the parliament, passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and it gave permission to the government to send troops for fighting in Vietnam. But afterwards, this was proved to be a fake incident. So it is a very shameful incident in US history. Later on, they found out that this entire incident was staged. It was it was a drama, just so that they got a reason to officially start a war. So after 1964, the number of US soldiers increased continuously for the next 3 years, and by 1967, USA had 5 lakh soldiers fighting in Vietnam. It started huge bombing campaigns. Lots and lots of bombs were dropped on Vietnam. The number of bombs dropped was more than the total number of bombs dropped in entire World War II. So imagine, planes of Germany, US, UK, all combined, more bombs were dropped than those planes in Vietnam War. So entire World War II on one side and Vietnam War on the other, the number of bombings in Vietnam War was more. Also, they used chemical agents. Very specific event of this war: napalm and Agent Orange. This napalm was used for burning down forests. Look at this photograph. This is napalm burning down forest, and this is Agent Orange. This Agent Orange, what it does is, after you spread it on the trees, the leaves will simply fall off. Now, why were they burning these forests and defoliating the forests? Because they could not see from above where the enemy was hiding, where the Viet Cong guerrillas were hiding. So to take out their hideouts and to clear the areas, they could see clearly and they could attack easily. There were also problems in regarding this jungle. Look at this terrain. There is river here, jungle here, then there is a field here. This is how Vietnam is. It is a tropical country, and the soldiers of USA had lots and lots of difficulties. Look, they are walking in waist deep water here. Okay, and there are boats here which are burning down forest again, because if someone is hiding in these forests and they attack your boat while you're on the river, you can't do anything. Okay, you can't just fire in the trees. So they had to burn down these forests. But this was blatant use of chemical weapons, and later on it was banned by the UN. There are conventions on the ban of biological and chemical weapons now, but they were not at that time. Also, they had to take out their troops in helicopters. So many helicopters were used, and these helicopters dropped soldiers in the middle of the jungle, and from there they went on. So you can see it is not conventional warfare. Conventional warfare is where 10,000 people are standing in army formation, then there are 10,000 soldiers of the enemy and they both fight, as you might have seen in many movies. But this was unconventional warfare. This was jungle warfare. This was guerrilla warfare, and US soldiers were not ready for this. In fact, the main reason that US lost this war was because of this lack of experience in guerrilla warfare. And another reason, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army, they knew the terrain perfectly. Obviously, they were born there. Those soldiers had been born there. They had been brought up there. So they were very much familiar with the area, and they used a very innovative approach. Since US was bombing everything, they built tunnels. They built underground bunkers, and they stayed in there. So whenever there was bombing, they went inside, and when the US Army soldiers came like this, see, already they are coming after walking like this, then they came out of these tunnels and just killed them. So this is a very unique approach, and there was a large networks of these tunnels everywhere throughout Vietnam. Now we talk about the Tet Offensive. So by 1968, what was happening was that US government was telling its people that we are going to win very soon. In the next 5-6 months, we will win the war. This Viet Cong is almost over. But in January 1968, the Viet Cong they launched a surprise attack on the major urban army bases, and also very famously on the US Embassy in Saigon. So here, so you look at this in this map. These are all the major cities of South Vietnam, and together in the night, all at once, attacks were launched in these cities, on major government buildings, major army installations. That aim was to remove the government of South Vietnam in the night, and so that they could capture the entire region in one day itself. Although it was a military failure, they could not take down the government. They were pushed back, but it was a huge tactical win, a huge morale boost for the North Vietnam and Viet Cong people and the North Vietnamese army. It was a turning point in the war. Why? Because firstly, as I told you, it was a huge morale boost. Now North Vietnamese thought that we could launch such a big operation. It means we can win this war. On the other hand, people in the US thought that we are winning this war. But it came as a rude shock that no, Viet Cong is still very powerful. They can attack anytime. And popular perception of this war changed. People now came to people understood now that the government was lying to them. So for the first time, people went against the government. They said that no, you are lying to us. The war is not going to be over very soon. It will take a long time. The enemy is very powerful. You have not defeated the enemy as you are telling us. So an anti-war sentiment took place in US. Also, there were massacres like Lai Massacre in 1968. This My Lai was the name of a village where unarmed women and children were murdered by the soldiers of US Army. And photographers clicked the photos of these killings, and also dead bodies lying everywhere. And these photos were published in all the newspapers and magazines in the United States. And this turned the tide of public perception against the government. So this anti-war sentiment led to many protests. Okay, students were protesting all over the country in the campuses. There were huge rallies in Washington DC. You can see here in front of the Capitol building. This anti-war sentiment gained momentum. Also, people opposed the draft. What do you mean by draft? It means compulsory military service. So any young man who is fit to serve has to go and serve in the army. But this draft was opposed by many students, many young men. They said that why should we go and kill Vietnamese? What have they done to us? Why should I go and kill a Vietnamese person? They have done nothing to us. Why is the US Army fighting over there? So such kinds of questions were raised, and this anti-war sentiment is very strong in US even today. Another aspect of this war is the media war. For the first time, TV channels were showing footage of war. Okay, by this time TV was there in almost every house in US, and before this, during World War 1 and 2, reports always came in writing in newspapers. Okay, there were reporters in World War 2 and 1 as well, and there was huge reporting during both these wars, but at that time it was just words appearing in newspaper, only photographs. But now you could see the video footage of soldiers fighting, of soldiers going through these horrors, of people being killed, and all this was going directly into the drawing room of everyone, all the families, and there were many times uncensored reports about the horrors of the war. Now these Lai Massacre photos, they changed the public opinion. Also, there was a Pentagon report which was leaked, and this Pentagon report clearly said that yes, we have been lying to the public, we are not going to win this war very easily, and it will take long time and many people will die to win this war. So this was the truth, but the government was hiding it from people, and the Pentagon reports, when they were leaked, they were published in many newspapers. So all these things turned the public opinion against the government. This was the first time that the US public was against their own government in a war. Earlier, whenever World War II was fought, the people completely supported the US government, that yes, Nazis are bad, we need to fight them, we need to defeat them. But here the situation was different. You can see here such kind of photos. This is a very famous Pulitzer Award winning photograph. A small village, it was bombed by the US Air Force, and they dropped napalm here. Okay, you remember that napalm which burns everything, and it has burned the clothes of this little girl and many other little children, and their skin is also completely burnt. Okay, this is a very such photographs. If you search for Lai Massacre and napalm destruction photographs on Google, it will really melt your heart that such kind of chemical warfare was used. So these photographs, okay, another one here, this was a South Vietnamese officer. He killed a Viet Cong soldier who was arrested. He directly shot him cold-blooded on the street, and this was shown live, not live, I'm sorry, this was shown in the video footage in news. So such kind of things were gaining a huge momentum in US, and in 1968 there was a presidential election and Richard Nixon won. What he promised was that I will remove the US Army from Vietnam, and his policy was called Vietnamization. What was this Vietnamization? He promised that US soldiers will be reduced, and on the other hand, the South Vietnam, whom they were there to support South Vietnam, right? So their soldiers will be increased. So South Vietnamese forces will be increased and US forces will be decreased. And he started this in 1970, and by 1973 they were also parallelly trying to get North Vietnam to sign a peace treaty. So finally in 1973 a Paris Peace Accord was signed. USA exited from the war completely. By August 1973, no US soldier was fighting in Vietnam, but the fighting still continued. For some months it stopped, but then North and South Vietnam did not adhere to this peace accords, and they started fighting again. And by April 1975, North Vietnam easily captured Saigon. See, now there is no US army to support South Vietnam, but North is still supported by China, USSR. They are still supplying them guns. And so the North Vietnam and South Vietnam were unified in 1976 into a single country called the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Let me talk about the casualties. Around 58,000 US soldiers died during this war. Just to give you a hint, in the Afghanistan war, which has been going on since past 15 years, less than 10,000 US soldiers have died. But imagine, only within 10 years, more than 58,000 US soldiers died. 1.5 lakh were wounded. and these wounded soldiers contained a large number of people who had post-traumatic stress disorder. It is called PTSD. They were psychologically stressed. They had seen such horrors of war that their entire psyche had changed. Okay, so for the first time there was research in this post-traumatic stress disorder also after Vietnam War. On the other hand, Vietnamese people, it is said that around 10 to 20 lakh Vietnamese people died. Very high civilian casualties. Why? Because as I told you, Viet Cong was a guerrilla force, and guerrilla forces never use uniforms. They mostly fight in plain clothes, so you never know who are civilians and who are Viet Cong fighters. So it is very difficult to distinguish between combatants and civilians, and this was the reason that when they thought that this village has Viet Cong soldiers, they bombed the village, but later they found out that 100 people had died and they were all civilians. So such kind of things happened, and this is the reason the large number of casualties was there. Now, what is the impact of the Vietnam War? Firstly, it was the first time that US was defeated. Now you can say that they withdrew slowly, but actually it was a defeat for US because they did not win. Then second and most important thing, US and all the other developed nations came to understand that modern weapons alone cannot win wars. Even if you have superior air power, you bomb so much, but still you will not be successful without ground soldiers. Also, public perception. The reason for this war was not very well understood by the public in USA. They did not understand why are we going and fighting in Vietnam. First of all, they did not know where Vietnam was. Many people do not know where Vietnam is. And then they asked that why are we going and killing Vietnamese people? What has it got to do with USA? So these reasons were very less understood, and public perception has to be with the government. So later on, whenever US went to war, the public perception was managed very well. Even you see this in all the countries. If you remember, before the 1971 war, if you have heard, Indira Gandhi very famously gave a speech on All India Radio in which she gave the reasons that why are we going to war with Pakistan tomorrow? Because Pakistan has attacked this, because Bangladesh refugees are pouring in. So such kinds of measures are adopted by all the governments in the world. Okay, they take public towards their own side. Another thing was the peace movement. So this peace protest which started during the Vietnam War, they became very strong, and this peace movement is still very strong in US. Even they opposed the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Finally, Cold War dynamics changed. One very important change that was brought was that USA approached China for friendship, and by 1972 US and China had cordial relations. And this was because US understood that to have influence in Asia or Southeast Asia, we need to have good relations with China. Otherwise, we will lose our foothold in Southeast Asia. And as I told you that China was supporting North Vietnam, USSR was also supporting North Vietnam. So that is the reason that North Vietnam won the war. So this was a change in the Cold War dynamics. USA came to know that no, we are not that big a superpower that we can win alone. We need allies, and we need good relations with countries like China as well. So I hope you understood the lecture. Thank you.